Her body was defective for breeding, so they threw her out, but only a human made her a mother. On Ziraxa, some births were met with silence, because to make a sound was to acknowledge the shame. Alira had been born under such silence. She remembered none of it firsthand, of course, but the weight of that silence had followed her all her life. In the way people stepped around her, in the way her name was never spoken, in the way no one ever met her eyes unless they were about to scorn her. She wasn't simply ignored. She was a presence to be actively erased. Her hoverchair gave a low, coughing wheeze as it drifted a few inches above the cold stone garden path. The lev discs underneath jittered against the wind. She'd recalibrated them a dozen times herself, soldering decayed coils with her bare hands in secret, because no one in the colony maintenance wing would touch a defective device, especially not one meant for someone like her. Her skin, a soft emerald hue mottled with faint silver veinwork, was flushed darker today with anxiety. The color deepened across her collarbones, a subtle glow like moss under moonlight. It always gave her away when she was afraid. The bioluminescent garden ahead shimmered in symmetrical rows of sacred plants. Beyond them, the ceremonial herb stood beneath a towering prism tree, its white leaves trembling in the high-altitude wind. She wasn't supposed to be here, and certainly not alone. 3 robed males blocked the path to the herb she needed. They turned as she approached, the youngest one squinting in distaste. "You again?" he muttered, loud enough to carry. She said nothing. Silence, she had learned, was her only refuge. "She shouldn't be allowed to touch mirror root," said the eldest. "It's meant to bless fertility rites, not waste on something that can't even carry." Laughter, tight and controlled, like the snip of a blade. Alira lowered her eyes. The wind shifted her long black hair across her shoulders, and she felt the usual twist in her gut. Not rage, not even humiliation anymore, just exhaustion, the kind that pressed deep into her bones. She knew what they saw when they looked at her, the girl born with empty reproductive vessels. The void womb. That was the term the elders had used in the records. It meant biologically failed, spiritually cursed. It meant she would never bond, never conceive, never contribute to the genetic sanctity of the colony. It meant she had no value. "Maybe if you chew enough of it," one of the males jeered, "it'll finally root something in your body." Another laugh. Even the plants seemed to wilt under the sharpness of it. Alira's fingers curled tight over the input wand of her chair. She didn't respond. There was no point. They weren't trying to provoke debate. They were declaring what had already been decided. But then a voice broke the rhythm. Not sharp, not cruel, just present. "That's enough." The 3 males stiffened. One turned, annoyed, and then paused. A human man stood at the edge of the garden path. He wore a dust-worn jacket, field-grade boots, and a satchel that looked more stitched than printed. His hair was a mess of wind-tousled brown, his face open and sun-lined, but it was his eyes that made the air shift, steady hazel, quiet, and utterly unaffected by the tension. Liam Varick, the outsider. He wasn't part of the ceremonial classes. He wasn't even Ziraxian. He was here on a humanitarian contract. Ethnobotany, something most colonists didn't even pretend to understand. But his license had been approved by the High Council, and that made him, unfortunately, hard to remove. Liam didn't raise his voice, didn't puff his chest or reach for a weapon. He simply walked forward and stood beside Alira. No gesture, no grand announcement, just stood. The silence dragged. The 3 males muttered something under their breath and walked off, their robes hissing against the path like dry leaves. Alira didn't look up. She expected him to leave next, but instead the human knelt, not in reverence, but to be at her eye level. His gaze wasn't probing. It didn't seek her out like a thing to be examined or pitied. He just existed there, quietly. "I'm not here to fix anything," he said after a moment. "I just came for the mirror root, heard it helps with anxiety." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small root, freshly cut. Its fibers glowed faintly violet blue. Mirror root, a sacred herb, usually reserved for bonding ceremonies or maternal preparation. She'd never touched one, not officially. He offered it to her. Alira didn't move. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but confusion. People didn't give her things. They took them away. They ignored her, or worse, acknowledged her only long enough to humiliate her. And yet, here he was, offering something valuable, and not in pity, not in apology. She raised her eyes slowly, searching his face for mockery. There was none. They told me I'd never speak right, Liam said with a soft shrug. Guess they weren't wrong. But sometimes, being quiet says more. The silence between them softened. Alira reached forward, not smoothly but with clear intent, and took the root. Her fingers brushed his. His hand didn't flinch. She wanted to ask why, but the words, her voice, they didn't come. Still, she held the root in her lap, carefully, reverently, as if it might vanish. Liam stood. I'll be around again tomorrow, he said, stepping back. The samples need to be logged, and the soil here's complicated. She said nothing. He left without fanfare, boots whispering across the stone. The wind returned, but something else lingered. Alira looked down at the mirror root. She turned it in her hand, watching the soft shimmer shift under her touch. A forbidden herb offered freely. No ceremony, no transaction, no expectation. Just given. She didn't chew it. Not yet, but she didn't drop it either. Far above her, the sacred tree rustled in the wind, and in her chest something unspoken began to loosen, just enough to ache. She didn't sleep the night after the human gave her the mirror root. It sat on the shelf beside her mat, its glow dimming with the passing hours. She stared at it for what felt like an eternity, the faint bioluminescence pulsing softly in the dark like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. What did it mean to be given something? Not out of obligation, not out of mockery, just given. Alira lay on her side, fingers pressed under her jaw to dull the ache that always flared when she was anxious. Her chamber was small, tucked into the underlevel of her family's dwelling, a space barely large enough for her to maneuver her hover chair, and only because it had once been a storage alcove. No window, no ceremony drapes, no nameplate beside the door. Even the wall vines were clipped short, denied the chance to grow wild. She knew her family thought she couldn't hear them upstairs. Whispers about how she lingered too long in the outer garden, how she invited shame just by being seen. No one had asked if she needed help when she came in. No one noticed the fresh scrape on her palm where the input wand had snapped against her knuckle. Or maybe they had noticed and looked away. In the silence, Alira let herself think the unthinkable. If I had been born whole, would they have loved me? Would they have fought for me? She hated herself for wanting the answer. By morning, she hadn't touched the root, but it was still there. And somehow that felt important. The next day broke cold and silver, wind coiling through the narrow stone corridors like a living thing. Her chair's joints groaned as she maneuvered it toward the outer gates. She told herself it was for air, for quiet, but her heart pulsed faster the closer she came to the warm light tree. He was there before her, kneeling in the garden soil, gloved hands busy pulling up a dense cluster of rootstock. He worked with unhurried precision, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His satchel lay open beside him, datapad half buried in the moss. She paused, uncertain. He didn't look up, not until she rolled into view, then a glance, not a startle, not surprise, just recognition. Morning, Liam said simply. Alira gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He accepted it like it was enough. She settled beneath the tree's wide boughs, grateful for the slight warmth that radiated through its crystal-veined canopy. For a while, they said nothing. Just the faint sounds of soil being disturbed, datapads humming, distant chimes from a temple bell. He crouched beside the mirror bed again, speaking half to himself. Nutrient drainage in the upper root web. Might be iron deficiency, but it's not fungal, not with this leaf spread. She didn't reply, but she watched. He wiped his brow with the sleeve of his jacket and continued. Could be the subsoil membranes breaking down, or maybe the purification cycle's been interrupted. She tilted her head slightly. It was subtle, but he noticed. You understand this? He asked gently, looking up. Alira hesitated, then nodded again, slower this time. Of course you do, Liam said with a faint smile. You've been here longer than anyone who's actually paying attention. Her throat caught. That wasn't just flattery. He meant it. He went back to his work, voice quiet. You know, where I'm from, the worst thing you can say to someone is that they were left behind. We don't mean it as insult. We mean forgotten, discarded, as if they never mattered in the first place. Alira's fingers trembled on the hoverchair's control wand. And yet, he added, the things left behind often survive in ways no one expects. She didn't realize she was holding her breath. Then her hoverchair shuddered, a sharp mechanical sputter. She frowned, tapped the input again, another stutter. The front left lev disc hiccuped, and without warning, the stabilizers failed completely. The chair dropped 1/2 meter. Alira spilled forward. Her body hit the stone with a muted thud, pain flaring through her hip and elbow as her torso struck the cold ground. Her braids snagged against the moss, and her robe twisted up over her thighs, exposing the smooth end of her upper leg where her body had never finished forming. Gasps rippled nearby. 2 robed apprentices froze near the inner herb. One whispered something about ill omens. No one moved to help her. No one ever did. Alira gritted her teeth, bile rising in her throat. She turned her face into the stone, willing herself to vanish, to melt into the cold floor. Not again. But then, warmth, hands, strong and steady beneath her arms. "I've got you," Liam said quietly. His grip was secure but not forceful. He lifted her carefully, one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees, and set her gently onto a patch of soft moss beside the path. Alira's breath shook, her face burned with humiliation. She waited for the pity, the soft words, the avoidance of her limbs, but Liam didn't look away. He adjusted her robe with quiet, instinctive dignity and pulled a small cloth from his coat, gently brushing the grit from her scraped palm. "I should have fixed that chair sooner," he murmured. Alira turned her head away. "No one else would have." He paused. Then, "That's not how it should be." Silence, the kind that wrapped itself around the ribs and squeezed. Then she whispered, raw and low, "Why?" Liam's hands stilled. He looked up at her slowly. "Because you were on the ground," he said, as if that explained everything. And maybe for him it did. He rose and knelt beside the broken chair, inspecting the lev disc with careful fingers. "The frame's rusted straight through. I can patch it again, but it won't hold." She said nothing. He turned back to her. His hazel eyes were soft but steady. "I can build something better." Alira's heart pounded. Not out of hope, out of fear. Better always meant different. And different always meant more pain, more shame, more visibility. She lowered her gaze, but after a long moment gave the smallest nod. Liam nodded back. No triumph in it, no savior's light, just quiet agreement. That night, when she returned to her dim chamber, her mother looked up as she passed, and then looked away just as fast. Alira didn't speak. She didn't need to. She closed her door, sat on her mat, reached for the mirror root one last time, and this time she bit down. The taste was sharp, earthy, almost unbearable. But she kept chewing, because bitter roots still bloom if given time. The garden was empty when she arrived. Wind whispered through the hollow stems of the prism trees, carrying the scent of crushed mira leaves and damp stone. Alira eased her hover chair beneath the outstretched limbs of the warm light tree. Its glowing canopy pulsed faintly overhead, soft gold melting into pale blue, like breath caught in crystal. She was early, earlier than she needed to be. She'd told herself it was just to avoid the ceremonial crowd that sometimes passed through this quadrant in the late morning, but she knew better. She had hoped he would already be there. He wasn't. The cold seeped in through the edges of her robe. She tucked her hands into her sleeves, jaw clenched against the instinct to leave, to hide. Her hover chair jittered as usual, its back lev disc struggling to hold balance on the slightly sloped flagstones. It wasn't pain that bothered her. It was the waiting. He arrived quietly, like always, boots soft on the moss path, breath visible in the chilled air, a satchel slung across his chest, one hand wrapped around a thermos, the other clutching a rolled data pad. "You're early," Liam said gently, as if it were a question, not an observation. Alira didn't look at him right away. She studied the lines of his face instead, how the wind had tousled his hair, how his gloves were smudged with soil. "I needed quiet," she said. He sat down on a low bench beside her, not too close. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. After a while, she asked, "Do you really want to know?" Liam turned to her. "Know what? Why they hate me. Why they can't even look at me without sneering." He didn't interrupt. Alira stared at her own hands. "It's not just because of how I look. That's only part of it." She pulled her robe slightly higher, as if steeling herself. "I was born without a womb node. There's no internal bonding matrix, no fertility spiral. Biologically, I can't conceive. Not now. Not ever. My mother was told before I was old enough to crawl. The elders called it a spiritual deficiency, said the gods had refused to complete me." Liam's brows furrowed, but he said nothing. Alira's voice remained steady. but low. In Xeraxian culture, females are expected to carry the next generation, not just biologically, but ritually. Bonding is sacred. The womb isn't just a vessel, it's a temple. And mine is empty. They call us void-born. It's a curse. She finally looked at him. To them, I'm not just incapable of producing life. I'm a threat to it. A reminder that even in the most sacred bloodlines, corruption can form. That's why the males look at me with disgust, because I represent what they fear most. Silence stretched between them. Liam's jaw was tight, not in judgment, in anger, not at her, at them. Alira went on, her voice quieter now. One elder once said, "No man should plant seed in dust." Liam flinched. She gave a hollow smile. So they don't. They pretend I'm not there. And if I am there, they pretend I'm not a woman. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes unreadable. Why? You didn't do it. Number. But I recognize it. He looked down at his hands. Where I'm from, it's not always biology. Sometimes it's poverty or skin or stuttering. When I was young, I couldn't say a full sentence without choking. Adults used to talk around me like I was a ghost. Some laughed, some pitied, most just ignored me. He exhaled. But silence makes you harder, doesn't it? You start believing you deserve it, that it's safer not to be seen at all. Alira's throat tightened. I used to think, he added softly, that if I could grow something beautiful, something no one expected to survive, maybe I'd stop feeling like a mistake. She turned to him fully now. Did it work? No, a faint smile. But I started finding people who felt the same way, the ones left behind, and sometimes we see each other before we even speak. A long breath passed between them. The light shifted in the greenhouse canopy. The wind carried the scent of frost bark and root dust. She finally asked, those designs you had before, the diagrams on your pad, they were legs, weren't they? Liam nodded once. I wanted to give you something useful, he said. But I was rushing, thinking like a mechanic, not a person. You stopped. Yes, because you didn't ask me to fix you. She nodded slowly. But what if I'm asking now? He hesitated. Prosthetics like this, they're not just tools. They're a partnership between mind and matter. They need to be grown to fit your neural patterns, your muscle signals. That takes time, and there are risks. Pain? Yes, and rejection. The tech's organic. It can adapt, but your body has to accept it. We'd need to run compatibility scans, create a base grafting mold, stimulate nerve response, stabilize heat exchange. Can you do all that? I've done it before, he said, but never for someone who matters this much. She was silent. Then, how long would it take? Depends. Could be weeks, maybe more. You'll have to train every day, fail a lot. It won't be elegant, not at first. I don't care about elegance. He studied her. What do you care about? Alira's voice didn't waver. Not needing that chair anymore. It wasn't about walking, not really. It was about choice, about reclaiming what had been stripped from her, the right to take up space, the right to stand in a place and not be hidden. Liam stood slowly, the data pad in his hand. I'll start reworking the designs tonight. Come back tomorrow. We'll begin mapping your neural feedback. She nodded. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back. Alira. Yes? When you walk for the first time, don't do it for them. Her eyes met his. I won't. The greenhouse was quiet, too quiet. Even the plants, usually rustling faintly under the warm air currents, seemed to be holding their breath. The fabrication unit hummed low in the corner, its blue light blinking in a slow, steady rhythm. Liam stood with his arms crossed, watching the simulation interface recalibrate for the third time that morning. Alira sat on the edge of the padded diagnostic table, stiff-backed and unspeaking. The robe she wore was loose around her hips, giving Liam access to the nerve ports embedded along her upper thighs. Her prosthetic sockets had been treated with bonding gel the night before, but even so, the cold touch of the sink clamps made her flinch. You ready? Liam asked gently. She nodded, but her jaw was tight. This might sting. I know. He leaned in to fasten the sink ports, pausing only briefly when her fingers twitched at the edge of the table. She didn't look at him, didn't blink. She'd trained her face to stillness years ago. As soon as the clamps clicked into place, the neural mapping began. A pulse ran through her lower spine, sharp as a knife. Her breath caught. The interface responded with a flicker of yellow. Not green, not stable. Liam frowned. Let's try the first position, he said. Slow flex, no lift. Alira nodded and focused. She tried to move her left thigh forward just slightly. The limb obeyed, but then the interface sputtered. A jolt shot back through her spine, enough to knock her breath loose. Her torso jerked. The leg went limp. Disengaging, Liam said quickly, already reaching for the abort wand. Alira pushed his hand away. No. You're spasming. Your nerves need time to adjust. I said no. Liam hesitated. Alira, I've lived in this body longer than you've known it. Let me fail on my own terms. Her voice was steady, but something behind it trembled. He stepped back. She tried again, the right leg this time, a softer approach. But the response was worse, off-sync twitching that left the joint rattling against the brace. The feedback overload made her exhale a sharp, half-strangled sound, not a scream, but not silence either. Liam powered down the interface. No, she snapped. You're going to fry your spinal relays if we keep going. I don't care. Well, I do, he said, voice harder now. She looked at him, startled by the tone. He met her gaze, firm, but not cruel. You don't get to prove your strength by breaking yourself. You've already done that. For them, for too long. The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she slid off the table, legs limp, the hover frame kicking in to keep her upright. She turned away toward the far end of the greenhouse where the light filtered through rows of sunfruit vines. Her shoulders shook. Liam followed, slow, careful. You okay? I used to be made to kneel, she said quietly, during ceremonies, not as punishment, as decor, a symbol of humility, of deformity. I would be dressed in white, seated at the edge of the sacred pool so the whole girls could walk past me, to remind them what failure looked like. Liam stood beside her, not speaking. I thought if I walked, I'd be free of that. She glanced at her leg sockets. But this is still a performance, isn't it? For them, for you. No, he said. She looked at him. This isn't a ritual, Liam said, and I'm not an audience. This is just us, trying, failing, learning. She turned fully toward him. And if I never walk, what then? Then we build something else. She stared at him. You're not disappointed? No. He smiled, small and honest. I'm grateful you didn't fracture your spine trying to impress me. That startled a breath from her. It might have been a laugh. Liam sat on the low bench, patting the space beside him. After a moment, she followed, her legs clicking softly into hoverlock as she eased down beside him. I wanted this to be clean, she said. Dramatic. A single step that made everything before it disappear. That's not how real things work, she nodded, eyes distant. Tomorrow, she said. We try again, but not to prove anything. To who? Liam asked. To myself, she said. Not them, not you, just me. He leaned back against the wall, watching the light shift through the greenhouse glass. You know, he said after a while, there's a plant that only blooms after fire, ash flower. Needs to be scorched before it even thinks about growing. She looked over at him. That sounds cruel. It's just nature, he replied. Sometimes surviving isn't the end, it's the start. Her fingers brushed his. Not a flinch, just warmth. And for the first time in her life, Alira allowed herself to sit in silence, not as punishment, but as rest. Tomorrow, the attempt would begin again. But tonight, failure was allowed to breathe. The morning she was meant to stand for the first time in her own legs, it rained. Not the heavy kind that smothered the soil, but a whispering drizzle. Slow, steady, seeping into everything. It turned the moss paths of the greenhouse slick with moisture and painted the crystal walls in streaks of liquid light. Alira sat in silence on the reinforced bench beside Liam's work table, a wool cloth draped over her lap, steam curling from the cup between her hands. The tea tasted of earth and bitterness, root brewed for focus, not comfort. It reminded her of the mirror root. She hadn't touched one since the day she'd chewed it in her room and vowed she would no longer remain motionless. Liam moved quietly around her, checking systems. He didn't rush, didn't speak unless necessary. His expression was focused, not anxious, but Alira saw the edge of tension in his jaw. This was no longer theory, no longer simulation. The prosthetics were finished. They rested on a low platform nearby, sleek, organic lines with a faint shimmer running through the root skin. They weren't silver or artificial looking, not like the ceremonial devices some elite warriors used. These were soft, light, built to echo her shape and tone, layered with warmth-sensitive interface nodes that had been grown, not forged. They looked like something alive. Alira hadn't spoken since she arrived. But now, as Liam knelt in front of her and lifted one of the legs into place, she finally broke the silence. "I dreamed last night I was running," she murmured. Across the temple courtyard, everyone turned to watch, not with disgust, with awe. Liam glanced up. "Sounds like a dream worth chasing." "No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I woke before they reached me, before I reached them." He didn't say anything to that, just fit the prosthetic into place and checked the pressure at the thigh socket. The second leg slid in more smoothly. The adaptive gel in the sockets had softened overnight to bond with her tissue data. Her body, though resistant at first, had begun to respond better with each day of training. Still, these were not extensions. They were intrusions, foreign roots inserted into a life that had only ever known stillness. He checked the final clamps. "You'll feel a brief pulse. That's the sync." Alira nodded, her fingers clenching the edge of the bench. When the current hit, she gasped. The pain wasn't sharp. It was deep, interior, as if something inside her bones was waking up after years of silence and didn't want to. Her breath hitched. She forced herself not to cry out. Liam stepped back to give her space. "Can you feel them?" he asked. "Yes," she rasped. "What do they feel like?" "Wrong, heavy, angry. That will change." "No," she said. "I will." She rested a moment. Then, with great effort, she pushed herself upright. Her core shook. Muscles that hadn't borne weight in years fired instinctively, confused and panicked. The prosthetic limbs responded, halting, stiff, but they didn't collapse. She stood, trembling, lopsided, breathing hard, but upright. The first step was chaos. Her heel caught the edge of a root vine, and her balance shifted too far forward. Her body pitched toward the ground. Liam moved, just slightly, but didn't touch her. Alira wobbled, then caught herself. Another step. She gritted her teeth. The pain wasn't gone. It hovered in every joint, every fiber. Her body screamed, but she took another step, and another. Liam kept pace beside her, saying nothing, but close enough to catch her if she broke. By the time they reached the far wall of the greenhouse, she was drenched in sweat, her hands shaking, her breath ragged. She stopped there, one hand braced against the glass. Raindrops streaked down the wall beside her reflection. For a long moment, she simply stared at herself. The long braid falling over her shoulder. The curve of her mouth. Her spine no longer bent in the hoverchair's cradle. She didn't look complete, she looked real. Behind her, Liam's voice was quiet. "You stood." She closed her eyes. "I didn't fall." "No," he said, "you chose not to." That night, she didn't return to the ceremonial quarter. She stayed in the greenhouse, wrapped in a blanket near the fabricator unit, watching the prototype logs flicker on Liam's pad. He brought her a flask of soup. Warm, spicy, simple. She took it with both hands. "Liam," he looked over from the terminal. She hesitated. "Why did you come here?" Not the mission answer, the truth. He exhaled slowly. "Because I wanted to see something survive that wasn't supposed to." She looked at him for a long time, then said, "You have." Neither of them smiled, but something between them shifted. Not as savior and saved, not as builder and broken. Just two people, both reshaping what had been given to them, together. She woke early before the bells, before the sun curled its golden fingers over the frost glass canopy of the outer dome. Her body felt heavy, not with fatigue. She'd slept better in recent days than she could remember, but with something else. Like the air around her was thick with unspoken things, expectation, memory, fear. The ceremonial procession would begin in under 2 hours. She sat on the edge of the cot, fingers curled into the woven mat beneath her. The prosthetics were attached already. She'd slept with them on, something she rarely did. But she'd wanted to wake ready. No delay, no room for doubt. And yet now that morning had come, doubt was all she could feel. Would they laugh? Would they avert their eyes? Would they spit, as some had before? Liam entered the greenhouse quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of Mira root infusion. He offered her one without speaking. She took it, hands brushing his. He noticed they were cold. "You don't have to go," he said, voice low. She didn't look at him. "Yes, I do." He nodded once. "Then I'll walk you there." Alira didn't speak again until they reached the main temple corridor. The path to the ceremonial square was lined with soft tread stone and pale crystal inlays that shimmered with residual charge. The banners had already been raised, deep maroon and pearl-threaded silk, symbols of bloodline sanctity and seasonal renewal. Everything was as it had always been, except her. She stood just outside the courtyard, gaze fixed on the archway ahead. Beyond it, the inner circle of elders and initiates waited in perfect symmetrical rows. Drones buzzed quietly above, recording the occasion. Alira's breath caught. "I can't do this," she whispered. Liam didn't move closer. He only said, "Then we wait until you can." "I thought I was past this." "You are. That doesn't mean it won't still hurt." She closed her eyes. The robes she wore were simple, not ceremonial, not defiant, just hers. The fabric was a soft gray, tied loosely at the waist with a strip of woven garden fiber. She'd chosen not to cover the prosthetics. There was no point pretending anymore. Not for them. She opened her eyes and stepped forward. The moment she crossed the archway's threshold, all sound seemed to pause. The high-born daughters of the sacred bloodline stood poised in their silks and crystal-threaded veils, their heads adorned with gold-boned circlets. The elders on the upper dais looked down from their platform, faces unreadable. And Alira walked, one foot, then the other, not smoothly, not without effort, but steadily, with posture straight, chin high, arms relaxed at her sides. The sound of her prosthetics, soft clicks against polished stone, echoed through the courtyard like a whisper of thunder. Eyes widened, mouths parted, whispers bloomed like weeds. "Is that her?" "She's not crawling. Those are human-made, aren't they?" A child near the edge clapped once before his mother snatched his hand down. An older woman bowed her head, not in deference, but in stunned reverence. And then Elder Saxtari rose. "Enough," he said. His voice cracked the silence like a lash. "This space is sacred." She was not summoned. Alira stopped, not out of fear, out of certainty. "I summoned myself," she replied. The air tightened. Saxtari stepped forward, his expression dark. "You bring shame with each unearned step. Your presence pollutes the sanctity of this ritual. Your body is altered, unnatural." Alira walked forward again, closing the space between them until she stood just beyond the dais steps. Her voice was clear. "Your sanctity is silence. Your tradition is cruelty. I bring neither. You cannot claim what was never yours." "No," she said, "but I can reclaim what was taken." She turned, then, away from him toward the gathered crowd. "You told me I was void, that I would never walk, never bond, never bear, that my body was empty and cursed." She paused. "But you were wrong." She looked down at her legs, then back up. "I walk now, not because I was healed, not because I was fixed, because I chose to." One of the younger girls in ceremonial robes stepped forward, uncertain. "I was told not to speak to you," she said, voice barely audible. "They said your touch would pass the flaw." Alira held the girl's gaze. "Then touch me." The girl hesitated, then reached out, took Alira's hand. No one moved. No lightning struck. No curses fell. Just skin against skin, software alive. And then, one by one, others stepped forward. A young father, an older apprentice, a former classmate who had once called her half-flower in mockery. They stood beside her, not to protest, not to applaud, but to witness. Elder Saxtari said nothing more. He turned, stiff and stone-faced, and returned to his seat. The ritual resumed. But it was no longer the same. Alira stayed only until the bells rang. Then she left, walked out on her own legs, on her own time. Liam waited at the archway. She reached him slowly, legs trembling from the effort, but her eyes were bright, her lips taut with something just shy of a smile. "I almost didn't go in," she murmured. "I know. I almost fell." "But you didn't," she exhaled. "I need to sit down before I collapse." He laughed softly and caught her under the arms, guiding her to the low garden bench beneath the warm light tree. They sat in silence for a long time. "Do you think they'll forget?" she asked. "No," Liam said. "That's the point." They didn't speak as they walked back from the ceremony. Alira's gait was slow, her steps deliberate, but there was no shame in them anymore. The soft tech prosthetics moved as if tuned to her heartbeat, no longer foreign, no longer borrowed. They were hers now. When they reached the greenhouse, the quiet was different. It didn't hum with expectation or duty. It breathed like a held breath finally released. Liam opened the door. Alira stepped inside first. He closed it behind them and turned off the outer lights. It wasn't planned. There were no rehearsed words or signals, just the quiet knowledge, passed in the glance they shared at the threshold. Something had shifted, not in urgency, but in certainty. They were ready. She sat on the edge of the workbench, fingertips grazing the grain of the wooden surface. The blanket he'd left there the night before was still folded beside her, faintly warm from the sun that had touched it earlier. Liam stood nearby, giving her room, letting her decide. She turned to face him fully. "You don't have to stay tonight." He stepped closer gently. "I don't want to leave." There was no trembling in her voice now, no hesitation in her fingers when she reached for his hand. The first kiss was soft, not because they were afraid, but because they had waited long enough to savor it. His lips brushed hers like breath, and for a moment, that was all. No heat, no demand, just the unfamiliar but welcome truth of contact. Her hand rose to his chest, splayed across the fabric of his shirt as if memorizing the shape of something real. When she pulled back slightly, her eyes searched his. "I don't know how this is supposed to work." "There's no supposed to," he said. Her eyes flickered down, then to the prosthetics. "I can't bend the way others do. I don't have thighs to wrap, or knees to rest on." "I know," he said, "and I'm not here for any of that." She exhaled slowly. "But I want you to touch me, all of me, even the places they taught me to hide." He reached up then, not to the artificial limbs, not to the places that were quiet and mechanical, but to her face. He brushed a strand of her black hair back behind her ear, then cradled her jaw gently with his palm. "You don't need to hide anything from me," he said. She nodded. "Then help me. Lie down. The right way." He guided her carefully onto the padded surface near the bench, a low table used for scans and equipment, now quiet and cleared. She settled onto her back with effort, propping herself up slightly on her elbows. The prosthetic legs extended downward, but she kept them locked, angled gently to the side. She couldn't bend them naturally, but she didn't need to. Liam knelt beside her, letting her set the rhythm. She reached for him. When he kissed her again, it deepened slowly, like stepping into warmth after years of cold. His hands moved with intention, not possession. He explored her body not with hunger, but with reverence. Fingers over her ribs, the curve of her waist, the place where skin met biomech. He never flinched, never avoided, never pretended she was something she wasn't. Her breaths grew uneven, her skin flushed deep jade where the silver tracery of her veins lit beneath it. Liam felt the tremble in her core muscles, how her body remembered tension before pleasure. "I've never," she began, then stopped. He pressed his forehead to hers. "Then I'll wait, as long as you need." She shook her head. "I don't want to wait anymore." He moved beside her, not over her, nestling at her side, their bodies aligned in a shape that suited her posture. Her legs remained extended, supported by the low cushions he placed beneath them. She curled toward him, one arm wrapped around his neck, the other pressed to his chest. It was not the position they would have chosen in another life, but it was perfect for this one. She guided him with her breath, her hands, the slow press of hips against hips. And when he entered her, she gasped, not from pain, but from the unbearable intimacy of being seen, entirely, and touched anyway. Liam didn't speak. He held her. He moved with her. And she moved with him, halting, trembling, but never hiding. They made love slowly, reverently, as if every motion was a line of a language only their bodies had ever spoken. After they lay tangled in the warmth of a blanket he pulled down from the upper rack. Her face was tucked into the hollow of his neck, her breath damp against his skin. One hand rested over his heart. He traced idle patterns along her spine with his fingers, murmuring nothing, just being. At last she whispered, "I thought they ruined me." "They didn't." She lifted her head to look at him. "You didn't fix me, Liam." He met her gaze. "I know. You just let me find myself." A quiet smile touched his lips. "And I love who you found." She curled tighter against him. "So do I." It began as a whisper in her body. At first she mistook it for fatigue, nothing new. Her legs had been working harder lately. She'd walked farther than ever before during the ceremony. Even a body used to stillness had its limits. So when her back ached, or her hips tightened unexpectedly, she dismissed it as consequence. But then came the warmth. It started low, just beneath her navel, a subtle heat like the ghost of a pulse, not painful, not alarming. but there, present, persistent. She kept it to herself. Maybe it was the nutrient shifts in her diet. She'd started eating more, drinking more root broth, more human grains Liam cultivated in his side plots. Her metabolism was adapting to movement, to activity, to change. But then her sense of smell changed. One morning, as Liam brewed mira root in the kitchen alcove, she recoiled from the scent so sharply that her head spun. He looked at her, puzzled. Too strong? She smiled tightly. Just not today. She sat through breakfast, forcing each bite, her stomach fluttering like it was unsure of its own purpose. The nausea came next. It arrived like a memory, unexpected, unwelcome, impossible. It bent her over one morning just after sunrise, hands gripping the edge of the low sink as her body purged itself. Not violently, just enough to leave her gasping and hollowed. She wiped her mouth, closed her eyes. No, she said aloud to the empty room. You don't get to dream now. But her body said otherwise. Her pulse had changed, slower, heavier. She felt it in her throat sometimes, like a drum echoing from inside. By the 10th day, she knew something was wrong, or right, or both. She found herself standing in front of a mirrored panel longer than usual, her hands brushing over her abdomen, her fingers tracing the softness that hadn't been there weeks ago. Not bloating, not bloat, something deeper. Her prosthetics fit tighter. Her center of balance had shifted. When Liam entered the greenhouse later that evening, she was already seated on the floor, data pads spread around her like petals, all showing anatomical diagrams and archived medical anomalies from mixed species case studies. He set down his tools slowly. What are you reading? Mutations, she said without looking up. Anything interesting? She hesitated. Yes. He approached, crouching beside her. Alira, talk to me. She looked up at him then, and her eyes were raw, not with fear, but with shame. I was told I had no womb node, that my genetic profile was incapable of nesting life, that even if I bonded with someone, the body would reject conception. He nodded slowly. So either they were wrong, or something's gone very wrong now. She handed him the biometric log she'd been compiling secretly for days. Her pulse variability, resting body temperature, stomach pH shift, hormonal patterns, subtle but undeniable. Liam's brows furrowed. This isn't nothing, he said softly. I know. His voice gentled. You think you might be pregnant? No. She paused. I think I might already be changing, and that terrifies me. Liam didn't rush to reassure. He didn't make promises. He simply stood and held out a hand. Let's find out. They walked together, slowly, to the human diagnostic station outside the inner colony ring. The technician, a kind woman named Mara, with skin like sun-warmed clay, ran the scan without comment. She only asked Alira to lie flat and breathe evenly. The room was quiet but not sterile. The soft hum of the biopanel gave it rhythm, like a second heartbeat. After a few minutes, Mara returned with the results, displayed not as words, but as a living waveform suspended in midair. At its center, a small orb of light pulsed in rhythmic motion. Alira stared at it. What is that? She asked. Her voice was barely audible. Mara's eyes softened. It's a heartbeat, 9 weeks old. Strong, yours, and not yours. Alira's hands began to tremble. I can't be. You are. Mara placed a warm hand on her shoulder. You're not broken, Alira. You never were. They didn't speak on the walk home. Not because there was nothing to say, but because every word felt too heavy to say aloud. Back in the greenhouse, Liam lit the warm lamps and made tea. His hands were steady, but his eyes watched her closely. She sat in the same place she'd rested after her first steps, her hands folded on her lap. The silence stretched long before she finally spoke. I don't know how to be a mother. You don't have to know, he said, setting the tea down beside her. You just have to try, like you did everything else. She looked at him, eyes glistening now. I'm scared. So am I. Then why are you smiling? He reached out, took her hand. Because it means we're doing something real. Alira looked down at their hands, then to her belly, still flat but no longer empty, a world growing impossibly inside her. I was never meant to carry life, she whispered. You were never meant to be erased, Liam replied. But you weren't. She turned into him then, forehead pressed to his shoulder. I didn't believe it, she said. I did, he whispered back. They stayed like that as night fell, listening to the greenhouse hum around them, to the quiet miracle between her ribs. It was no longer about what was possible. It was about what had begun. The labor began in silence. No scream, no warning cry, just a slow, steady pressure that tightened like a rising tide in her lower abdomen. Alira woke to it in the pre-dawn hours, her body already curling instinctively into herself, hands gripping the edge of the nesting mat Liam had laid in the corner of the greenhouse's warmest quadrant. He was beside her in seconds. He had felt her breath change, heard it. "Is it time?" he asked softly. She nodded once. Her jaw was tight, eyes closed. The pressure's low, but it's building. The contractions feel steady. They had rehearsed this, trained, studied every cross-species delivery account they could find, but no record described this. A child born from a woman told she would never carry one. A hybrid formed in defiance of biology, doctrine, and history itself. Liam rose, pulling up the soft light panels, activating the heat vents, and checking the sterile field they'd prepared. He moved quickly but not panicked. Every gesture was calm, practiced. He had never assisted a birth before, but he had helped people survive worse things than pain. She moved slowly into the supported birthing posture, limbs braced and prosthetic legs locked into the wide, open alignment they'd tested weeks ago. She couldn't bend like others could, but her upper strength was formidable. She planted her hands, grounded herself in the moss-lined basin beneath her. This body had held shame long enough. It would hold life now. The first hours passed in quiet struggle. She didn't scream, not because it didn't hurt, but because she was present. Every breath anchored her. Every pulse reminded her that this was hers. Liam sat beside her through every contraction, counting with her, timing the intervals, pressing a damp cloth to her brow when her sweat began to sting. At one point, she bit his hand to silence a growl of pain. He didn't flinch. He only leaned closer and whispered, "You're almost there. Keep going. I'm right here." By the 6th hour, the pain had doubled. Her body burned. Her prosthetics twitched with phantom signals, feedback loops firing off as her core strained. "Push with your breath," Liam said, gently supporting her back. "Not your shoulders. Let it flow." She gritted her teeth. "Easy for you to say." He chuckled once hoarsely. "Maybe, but I'd trade places if I could." She shook her head fiercely, eyes glistening with sweat. "Number, this is mine." She pushed, harder this time. The pressure dropped, and in its place came a stretch so deep it nearly broke her. She gasped. Liam moved to her side, positioned carefully, watching for the head as they'd studied. "I see it," he whispered, voice trembling. "Dark hair. Alira, you're doing it." Her breath caught. She bore down again, and again. And then, suddenly, release. A slick cry split the air. Alira froze, chest heaving, every nerve trembling. And then, the sound came again, a high, sharp, living wail. Liam caught the child wrapped in the soft mesh towel they had warmed in advance. His hands shook as he checked the pulse, the breath, the weight. Alira, still trembling, looked up with wide, stunned eyes. "Is it?" "She's perfect," Liam whispered. "She's perfect, Alira." He brought the infant to her chest. The moment their skin touched, something deep inside Alira cracked open, not like a wound, but like a door. The child was small, wrinkled, already curling into the familiar rhythm of her heartbeat. Alira wept. She hadn't cried in years, not like this, not from joy so fierce it burned. Liam wrapped his arms around both of them, lowering his forehead to Alira's shoulder. They stayed that way for what felt like forever. The rain started hours later, soft and warm against the greenhouse roof. They named her at sunset. They sat in the soft circle of bioluminescent vines, the child asleep between them on a blanket. Her hair was dark as Liam's, her skin a gentle green like Alira's, deeper than Xeraxian tone, richer than human pigment, new, whole. "What do we call her?" Alira asked. Liam traced a finger along the child's tiny hand. "What name holds all of this?" Alira was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "Kailari." Liam looked up. "What does it mean?" Alira smiled faintly. "In the old tongue, from silence, something born." He closed his eyes, held the name in his mouth like prayer. "Kailari Varric." She nodded. "Our daughter." Outside, the sky darkened. But within the greenhouse, under the vines and the low hum of the growing lights, 3 hearts beat in perfect rhythm, No longer alone, no longer broken, just alive.